Hello and welcome to another TOG chat. I'm Robert Osborne, principal of the Osborne Group. I'm joined by my colleague Laurel McCombs, also of the Osborne Group. How are you today, Laurel?
I'm good. How are you, Bob?
I'm doing okay. It's Friday. Well, it's Friday for us. You may be listening to this at whenever you're listening to, but hopefully it's Friday for you as well. So today, Laurel, I was thinking we would join the very large chorus and discourse on AI.
All
So
right.
we're gonna do it because everyone else is doing it, and we certainly wouldn't want to be accused of, not talking about the thing that everyone is talking about. So maybe just start off. I'm curious, just sort of how you, as like a baseline, because I certainly have an opinion about sort of how I began thinking about it and then how I think it's evolved a little bit. But I'm sort of curious about like what your baseline thoughts are about AI and fundraising and sort of what impact it'll have on the field, if any.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think there's a few different impacts that I'm thinking about as I think about AI and just the role it's playing both in fundraising and kind of in the nonprofit sector in general. I think there's the impact it has on our work and our ability to do work effectively, efficiently. There's, as we'll probably talk about, also some potential pitfalls and dangers with utilizing AI to do some of our work. I think my general feeling is that there's probably some really practical implications, and some really great ways that we can use it. But there's also some ways that I think, not that I'm going to be like, don't do that, but proceed with caution, right? Like be thoughtful and think through it. I think the other implication of AI that folks maybe aren't thinking as much about in terms of how they're using it and what they're doing is just all of the things that are happening in the world with AI that other people are doing, that other systems are using, that is impacting us as an organization, right? So I look at things like the way when you do a Google search and the first result you get is an AI generated overview. That all of that information, if somebody searches your information online, like all of that information is getting pulled from somewhere. Boy, make sure that your information, the information that's out there about you, is accurate and up to date, and you know what's out there, because they're not necessarily going to get pointed to your website first, right? So I was recently at a conference and the CEO of Candid was talking, and she was really the one that kind of planted this seed in my head, like, is your Candid profile up to date? Is your right? Because those are the places that the AIs are pulling from, and so and that's just one example. But there are all of these things happening with AI out there that you're not doing, but that are impacting you. And I think that that's the other side of this coin that maybe not as many people are thinking about.
Yeah, I think all that is right. I think I began. I'm sort of an AI skeptic in general, which doesn't mean that I don't think it's going to have a big effect on our world. It's probably it feels like the timeline will be longer than maybe people are discussing. So I kind of come into this discussion and from a slightly skeptical standpoint, particularly vis-a-vis fundraising, because I think you and I are, not to disclose our ages, but I think you and I have been around long enough that we've heard multiple, you know, it's occurred. We've had multiple cycles where like this is going to change fundraising, forever, and it just never does, right? Like crowdfunding didn't change, fundraising forever. It had an effect. It had an effect on it. It's a way of doing it. I thought maybe community-centric fundraising would be revolutionary. It's had an effect, but it's not revolutionary. So I think I was kind of like, well, I don't, I'm sure it has its uses, but I don't know that it's going to have this massive effect. But I think I've probably underestimated, and the reason I think that I was at the IFC, the International Fundraising Congress in the Netherlands last month, and IFC has very good speakers and cover a lot of topics, but For anyone who's been there, like the really interesting things kind of happen more at the bar. And so I was at the bar and and I met an AI guy who was running like a company that was providing services for AI, and I kind of gave him my spiel about being skeptical. And it was very interesting about how he talked about it, because I guess in my head I was thinking like, oh, it's going to be this just new way of doing things rather. But what it is maybe a more powerful way of doing some of the things that we do overall. And so the example he was giving was just using it for, you know, it's an easy way to interface with donors that feels comfortable and familiar, like through a chat bot that just allows for like greater segmentation, right? Like instead of kind of filling out a form or a survey, it can all be kind of couched as like, we want to be accountable to you and responsive to you. It's done in a conversational manner. And then you can kind of really go down the rabbit hole of what people like. And once we have those segments, it's much easier to sort of track like who responded to this or who responded like, oh, we're going to feed them this thing, or so like that the donor journey that we kind of do with major gifts and maybe to some extent mid-level giving, suddenly we can probably do it with annual donors, your regular annual donors in a way that's pretty seamless, and just sort of craft and map things out, and then based on those responses, we can get pretty granular, right? It can just branch off into lots of different areas, and it's all can be automated. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I'm like, okay, well, I'm like, segmentation still exists. It's still, it's going to kind of just still be segmentation, but it's probably a much more effective way, or potentially effective way of doing segmentation. And that's when I kind of realized, I'm like, all right, Osborne, perhaps you are not being imaginative enough about what this what this kind of work what this kind of work can be.
Yeah, and I'll admit that my personal usage of AI and the place where I live most comfortably as it relates to AI is kind of in the large language model, chat GPT kind of world of this. And from that perspective, I think there are a ton of efficiencies that nonprofits can benefit from, and ones that I don't have qualms with, that I do maybe on the corporate side of things, where we're seeing some of these AI tools that are actually replacing jobs that are meant for entry level and lower dollar workers. And I think, gosh, can we not impact those people first? On the nonprofit side, like, we don't have enough people to do the work anyway, and we don't this
Mm,
isn't work that's replacing somebody's job. This is work that isn't getting done at organizations, or it's work that is taking too much time off of people's plates that could then free them up to do other things. So I think about proposal writing, I think about drafting appeals, I think about all of the kind of large language model, chat GPT, Gemini kind of things that AI can do. And I think there's some real efficiencies. Now, obviously I'm not saying just like throw something and then take it and put it out into the world, like apply all the rules of good AI usage to it. But I think this could be a thing for people to actually free them up from doing really monotonous, fairly rote stuff that takes them a lot of time. And so I from that perspective, I think, yeah, there's some real opportunities. I think where I get scared from that side of things also, though, is I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day about when when given the choice of how we're going to engage with donors, we, and I say globally, the nonprofit we, folks almost always choose the
mm,
most passive route, right?
yeah, no, you're right.
I we have spent a long time talking about it, and we have other chats on our blog where you can hear us rant and rave about good donor engagement and stewardship. And there's a reason we keep ranting about it, and it's because when most nonprofits will just take the like put one way pushed out communication route. And so my worry is like in some ways, this all just continues to encourage that. And what I want to understand is, how do we use AI effectively to make us better at two-way engagement, right?
Mm,
Because there's got to be some practical way that we do that, and don't just use, because this is also the reason why things, you mentioned crowdfunding wasn't the thing we thought it was going to be. I would also say text giving was not the thing we thought it was going to be, nor was email, nor is social media. Like,
yeah.
all of these, the fact that we still, all these years later, direct mail is still the thing, direct snail mail is still the thing that raises more money than online donations, email, right? Like, we still haven't figured out what that thing is. But then I go back and I wonder, is it just because the thing is not pushed out one way broad-based communication? Like, is the thing now that we've got to figure out two-way engagement with donors at all levels, which goes back to your segmentation piece. And so I love what you were talking about, because I think, like, if we can utilize AI to better map out the donor journey, and not just the one-way communications that we're pushing out to folks, but how we're actually engaging them in some two-way dialogue, even if it's not with us, right? Like, even if it's with a chatbot, right? That's what's really interesting and exciting to me.
No, I think that raises an interesting point. And hello to my cat behind me. So if people see me reaching behind, that's because he likes to do this when I'm on Zoom. But um, no, I think that's right. It's exactly the opportunity and exactly the danger. And I like your framing of it, because it should be, to your point, like unlike other industries, we're like chronically resource challenged, right? So it's not going to be, at least initially, people losing their job. And in a, if we take an optimistic view, it's right. Like, oh, I can write better proposals, or stronger, or I can write more of them. I can, or maybe I'm not writing proposals at all, and now I have freed up time to build relationships, to your point about two-way communication, which I think would be the ideal way of doing things, right? Like using chatbots to enhance the opportunity to have segmentation, to interact with donors, to increase donor engagement, as opposed to your other point, which is where we're just going to let the robots do it, and we're not going to do it. So I think that's interesting. And I think too, the time saver part resonates with me as well. I was on a webinar earlier this week with Aspire, Jennifer Fila, friend of the firm, and they were doing a live demo of a donor tool. I think it was called Donor Atlas, but don't quote me. And it was interesting. The framing of that wasn't like, oh, we're going to be able to do, like, it wasn't doing anything differently than a researcher was doing, but it could just do it much faster, right? And it created an easy to use profile, and it was their whole point is like, this is going to cut way down on, if you have like a wealth screening tool, and now you got to go through your list of 2,500 donors, how long does that take you currently? And we think we can shave real time off of it, which was very super interesting. And like, that's a really good use case. It's not like a radical redoing of research, right? But it is suddenly saying that, like, well, maybe now a mid-sized or small organization can have the same research capacity of a much larger institution, which is exactly, I think, the thing that wealth screening software does. Is like, it's like a quick and dirty research department, right? For small organizations that don't have the resources to hire, a dedicated researcher. So, yeah,
Well, I
yeah,
mean, I'm sorry, just to jump in, like, but to some extent, right? Like, and I only jumped in because I was just having this conversation with like a mid-sized organization before we jumped on this call, and we are kind of walking through, like, functionally, there's some restructures, and we were like, oh, if we do this position, does that cover all the functions? And it was kind of like the one function that we hadn't figured out how to cover, right, was research. And I said, for where you are, this is probably it's a little bit, everybody's got a little bit on their plate, probably for their own portfolios and things like that. And, but, and we're talking about wealth engine, and the problem with wealth engine is it's incredibly limiting. Like, it's great for segmentation, right? But it's not actually always providing the data we actually need. So it's always just the starting point, and then there's like all this other research that needs to be done. So I love that there's potentially a tool that then goes and culls all of the other stuff, right? That we would then have to go like do 50 Google searches and go look at the business listings and go, right? Like that something else is then taking the wealth screening plus all that other stuff that's just
Yeah.
out there in the world, right? And kind of bundling that all
Yeah,
together.
pulling it all together. Yeah, it was pretty interesting from that perspective. And I learned a new metric amount of time. Like, well, just like I hadn't really thought because you and I are not like deep researcher. I mean, we know research, but it's not a job that we've necessarily held ourselves. But like, yeah, the time per prospective donor, I'm like, oh, that's a good metric. And their whole thing was like, and I'm sure research people know that, or although like many other metrics, I sort of wonder, this is the first time I've heard this, that like how the level of adoption, that it's out there in the field, but it seems worth measuring and it seemed like an interesting way to do it. Now, to your earlier point, what I had heard too was like some organizations sort of testing major gift officer chatbots, which to me, now again, this could be a get off my lawn, you kids kind of situation, but I don't think it is because it feels like I don't see how you do major gifts through a chatbot. Like it might be an interesting way to gather information from somebody in an engaging way, rather than again filling out that survey or, some of the other tactical means that we use to get basic information about our donors, and then we use, gift officers to kind of take it the rest of the way. But I've seen some that sound like they're more or less going to serve as gift officers. Now, maybe that's just how it's being advertised, and that's not really the true intent of it. But, I think to your point, the danger is like, oh, we're not dealing with all these donors, and so, let's just automate it through some kind of AI, which again, if done well, could be useful because you're not talking to them. And if you can make it engaging in a two-way sort of way, then it's great. But it also could just be right. Like we're not gonna deal with these people. It's basically direct marketing by another name.
Yeah, well, and then I say like, so what are you freeing up time for? Right.
Mhm.
I mean, I think most organizations we work with have a real desire and real intent to do better mid-level and major gift work. And
Mhm.
the biggest reason they don't is because they already have a bunch of other things on their plate, and it just for any number of reasons doesn't become a priority. And when I'm looking at the things I'm going to choose to use any tool for, right, technology tool, whatever, like any tech tool to help me with, I'm going to use it to help me to fill the gaps in the things that are not direct donor contact, right? I mean, direct like two-way
Yeah.
donor engagement. Because I don't know that we are to a point yet where AI or anything replaces that. And it's also not common enough in our industry that if you're the only one who's doing it and you've got a major donor who is working with 10 different nonprofits, has major gift officers assigned to them from 10 different organizations, the likelihood that you are then going to be the only one who is now using this technology to engage with them, it's setting you apart. And I'm not sure it's setting you apart in a good way.
Right. Yeah.
And again,
Yeah,
I
no, I
just
think
say
that's
like,
a really
like, yeah, sure, use AI to free up time from tasks that we we don't need to do, that aren't high return on investment,
Mhm.
or are just things that naturally work to have a bot do, right? But you're freeing yourself up to do the more relational work, right? And I have to question, like, if I'm going to use AI to do major gift work, what am I freeing myself up to do? What's the other thing that's so much more important than that I'm freeing up staff time for? I don't know what that is.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. I mean, I guess the argument would be if you have more people in your portfolio, than you can deal with. But I think you and I would argue, well, that's a nice problem to have, and you should probably, figure out a way to deal with those people, like because at least theoretically, those are profit centers, right? Like if you invest in them, you should get a good return on investment. And I think that I think, of course, the real challenge, I think, with all of this is just how bad our industry is at just adopting technology in general. Like, how many conversations do we have a month where we're like, well, what database do you use? Like, oh, we don't use a database. We have a spreadsheet, like, oh, what's your research capacity? Have you used well screening of some kind? Oh, no, we don't do that. And a reluctance to invest in exactly that. Things that I think you and I see as not everything. There's lots of fancy stuff that you don't need. But I think, we obviously work with some very large organizations, but we also work with some very small organizations. And I think the smaller the organization is, the more you actually do need the efficiencies that technology can provide for you, because you still need to have all the functions of a larger organization, right? But you don't have the resources to invest in it. So what's the thing that's going to let you have those same functions? It's using technology in a way that lets you be more productive. And so from that perspective, I think again, it's exciting. But to your earlier point, there's always the worry that, like, right, it'll be used to kind of do things the easy way. And I think just too that we just won't adopt it. People just won't be aware of it. I mean, I think to me, part of the challenge is just letting people, when I go to conferences and I hear conversations about technology and about AI, I kind of want to say, well, let's just have one on, like, this is what a large language model is and what it could do for you. And here's what AI is. And here are the tools that have existed for 10 years that you can and should use, like almost like an overview of like of tech out there in the world. Because, while there's obviously some very sophisticated organizations out there, I would say the rank and file of organizations that we run across, and that's a pretty broad spectrum, are not using technology optimally, are not, having things that you and I would probably consider fairly basic often.
Well, or they have pieces of it, but
Hmm.
they're not integrated into holistically into their systems. And so I'll see a lot of folks who will go out and kind of buy like one piece of software, one thing that's like gonna be the thing that's gonna do a cool thing, but then it doesn't get integrated with their CRM, or it doesn't then get integrated into their broader stewardship system. And so they end up getting a bunch of new donors who then don't get stewarded well. And right, like, so
Right.
it's the age old question when I have folks ask me questions about, like, should we do buy a wealth engine subscription, or even questions like, should we start a direct mail program, or should we, right? I like my question is always like, to what end? Right,
Mhm.
like, and what are you going to do with that data, that information, those donors, once you get them? And this is where AI is potentially really interesting, right? Is kind of the ability to utilize AI to help you map out some of those integrations, to help you think through, like, what is the, like, if I'm going to add a new like software program that allows us to take gifts easier, like, how am I integrating that then into my CRM system and into, right, like, there's so many questions that I think a lot of us who aren't tech people, who aren't, CIOs, who don't, but like, there's so many things like, I'll go ask ChatGPT and be like,
Yeah.
I don't know anything about this. What do you think, ChatGPT? And yeah, I always take it with a grain of salt, but it at least helps me think through things sometimes, right? Like, it at least helps you kind of think through, like, okay, I hadn't thought about that connection between that piece and that piece. And so, again, I think utilizing it as a source of information can be really great, and utilizing it as like, how do I think through this initially, to make sure if I'm going to jump on this, that I'm doing it in a responsible way. I think you could, for sure, like, kind of grain of salt, use it in that way as well. And so yeah, I again, I just go back to this this thing that's like bugging me, that from this conversation I had the other day, that I can't quite like get out of my head, which is just like, when given the choice, we always take the passive option. And I guess I would just put it out to there to everyone. Like, if you are considering adding new tools, if you are considering trying some new things, just like challenge yourself with that question. Like, what is it? What is the purpose of why I want to do this? What need, what gap am I trying to fill? And is it the right gap? Right? Like, is it something that's just, it's just another like, oh, this is going to be easy and I'm not going to have to talk to anybody, so I'll do this kind of thing? Or is this something that is easy and passive and allow and doesn't need to talk to anybody, so that it frees me up so that I can go talk to talk to people, right? Like, what are we using technology for? Like, are we using it to just keep doing same old, you know, one way pushed out communication that isn't particularly engaging? And I know we have to do it. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying that can't be the only thing we do. And I feel like that just continually is the thing that people lean in on.
Yeah, well, I think we've come full circle because I think yeah, I think again, you and I have been doing this a long time. I don't know that the basic rules that govern fundraising have changed that much. Circumstances have changed, the economy can change, the tools can change, but the basic human to human relationship part of this work, and communications part of this work and two-way engagement part of this work has really remained pretty constant through time. And so the question, yeah, to your point, is right. Like, how do we use technology to fill gaps and do things the optimal way, that we know that they should be done, which we've known for decades, right? Versus how do we, right, just use this to make our life easier, but not necessarily better. And I think that's going to be the big question as we go forward, because people are going to try to sell us a lot of shiny objects. And I think you're exactly right. We have to step back and say, okay, well, what is this allowing me to do more of? How does this increase, does this somehow plug in and let me increase my return on investment in somewhere else? And right, if I'm going to adopt it, what does this free me up to do now? Like, how do I make use of that extra time that I have? So yeah, I think we'll be keeping an eye on this. Like, it's here to stay, Laurel. It's not going anywhere. So we will
In some ways, as much as I hate it, there are parts of it I like.
you and I use it all the time.
I kind of, it's like I hate it conceptually. I kind of like it tactically.
Yeah. I think you and I and the rest of the world, that's kind of everyone's feeling. Like, it could be good, but we're a little worried about it. So yeah, we'll see how it evolves. But I think it poses some interesting questions for the industry, and we'll see what comes next. So, well, thanks again for joining us today, the TOG chat. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another topic, probably a year end or year beginning topic of some kind. But until then, happy fundraising, and we will see you soon.